you. We'll have Andrea Riley, who's the supervisor of the general record schedule, and she'll give you a update on what the team has been doing. Martha Murphy, who's the program manager for special access and the FOIA staff from our research services division here in Washington, will be discussing the practices to protect sensitive information. And David Miller, the Director of Records Management Services for the Federal Records Center program, will discuss current and planned records management consulting and digitization services that are offered by the Federal Records Center program. And then we'll have Matt Edson, who will bring us to a close at the end of the day. He's the supervisor for the Permanent Records Capture Team, and he'll discuss activities and the timeline for the upcoming 2017 annual move. And before we get started, there are a couple of folks that we'll introduce who are with us today. We have Jay Traynor, who is our executive for agency services, with us today. And we also have Lawrence Brewer, who is the Chief Records Officer of the United States, with us. Okay. So with that, we appreciate everyone coming out. We hope you enjoyed the coffee and donuts this morning. I got a recommendation that we ought to add hot water and tea, which we will try and do that when we get into the next fiscal year. We'll see if we can't do that. So with that, we'll start with Andrea. Is Andrea here? Not yet. Oh, she's going to be on the phone. Did not realize that. Okay. Do we have Andrea on the phone? I'm sorry? Oh, the phone is disconnected. Okay. All right, they're working on that. So we will move to Martha Murphy then, and we'll have Martha come up while they work on the phones, and then we'll get Andrea after that. Martha?
Can you guys forward to my slides?
Want me to do that for you?
Oh, okay. I thought so maybe they were doing it up there. I'll just pass
You got it?
I got it.
Okay.
There we go. Good morning. Thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here. I've had conversations with lots of records managers when the time comes to transfer their records to the National Archives. I've probably had the same speech I've given lots of people informally over the phone, and I'm thrilled to be able to come and talk to a larger group here today to give an overview of how National Archives handles records that come to us that are sensitive, how we determine whether they're sensitive, and then how we treat them once they're here. I don't know if there'll be time for questions afterwards, and I'll be happy to take any questions and also provide my contact information. Always happy to talk on the phone or via email. First off, I just wanted to say that I'm going to be talking about NARA's accessioned records. As you all know, we also have record centers, but when the records are in the record centers, they're still owned by the agencies. So at that point in time, all access is controlled by the agencies, and so the National Archives has no role in that. I bring that up because about once a month, we get a Freedom of Information Act request for records that are actually still in the Federal Record Center and still in control of the agencies. So I'm sure for most of you, you're sitting there going, yeah, right? But clearly someone isn't understanding this because we do get these kind of requests. I feel bad to have to pass people back to the agency they started with, but we have no legal authority over records until they are accessioned into our holdings. So we are going to be talking about NARA's accessioned holdings today. So first off, as you all know, NARA's mission is to preserve and make available to the public the permanently valuable records of the federal government. Pardon me. Today we're going to be discussing how NARA identifies sensitive records and how the FOIA applies to NARA, but please understand that the vast majority of our records are open and available to the public upon request without the need to file a FOIA. By open to the public, that means they can come into one of our facilities and ask to have access to the files, or they can contact a reference archivist and order copies if we can identify a discrete group of records that are of interest to them. So how has access been handled? Very, very briefly, I'd like to go a little bit through the background on this because I think it is helpful. Prior to the Freedom of Information Act, Agencies in NARA often had access restriction agreements. These agreements differed from agency to agency. And once the FOIA was passed, we realized that these access agreements really didn't have any legal binding anymore. Now, sometimes they fit very nicely into the FOIA. If the reason for the access agreement was that there was a lot of personal privacy information, we could still protect it. We just did it under the FOIA. But those access agreements had to go away. So after the passing of the FOIA, the agreements were replaced by NARA's general restrictions, which is something that is in our Code of Federal Regulations. The general restrictions, it's a little hard to see here, but the general restrictions basically mirror the FOIA. So on the left-hand side, there are 9 reasons under the Freedom of Information Act that the federal government is allowed to restrict access to records. If you look at our general restrictions, there are 9 reasons why NARA is allowed to consider records closed at transfer, and they are the same as the FOIA. So the first one would be security classified information. B1, our first general restriction, 1256.46, is national security classified information. So what do the general restrictions do? They allow us to consider records at transfer to be closed. So when records are sent to us, we have to make that determination. When we take legal custody, we use these guidelines to evaluate each group of records that are coming in. And we answer the questions: can these be made immediately available to the public, or are they sensitive and do they require screening prior to release? So how do we know? Well, the best way for us to know if records are sensitive at transfer is for you all to tell us on the transfer record. There are various metadata fields, as you all know, in the TR. One of these deals with FOIA restrictions. This is just a screenshot. It was provided to me by our accessioning staff. And so if you let us know right off the bat, then it's perfectly clear. NARA does also do a quality control assessment by examining the transfer documentation and applying the guidelines that we have established. We have had instances when records come in as unrestricted, but from the series title and other information that comes in, we are concerned about access, so we may consider them, we'll put a little flag on them and consider them restricted possibly, which means we're going to have to take a look prior to release. So what are the reasons, or what are the provisions that are most likely used by us? So this lovely colorful view of the 9 restrictions. The ones in red are the ones that are used most often. Security classified information, real simple. Is it confidential, secret, top secret, SCI? We definitely need to know that at transfer. We handle those transfers separately. Those records are handled by people with clearances, and then they are put in the appropriate SCIFs that, of course, comply with all information security requirements. That one's probably the easiest in some ways because it's very it's very black and white whether it's going to be classified or not. The next most common was probably statutory restrictions, tax information, grand jury information, census, the ones where there is a specific law passed by Congress that controls access. B6 is personal privacy. That's a huge one for us. My team does FOIA review. We spend most of our time trying to determine whether information is personal privacy. People always talk about PII. PII is personally identifiable information, something you could use to steal someone's identity, their social security number, their date of birth. But that's not the only kind of privacy. There's also what we refer to as sort of like contextual privacy, investigative files, where personal information may be in that file that's not readily available to the public. B7 is for all law enforcement information. There are subcategories within the B7, including one for personal privacy, source information, ongoing law enforcement, which we don't really have because we're not supposed to get records if there is an ongoing need for them. But we do use B7, for instance, for Department of Justice, FBI files, other law enforcement agency records. Also, Inspector General files. Every agency has an Inspector General. If there is information there that is sensitive, we could hold that under B7. Ones that we use, but not as often, are in black. That's trade secret and commercial information, business proprietary type. Financial institutions, that's really bank examination records as far as we're concerned, and the type of things that we get. B9 is a kind of weird one. It's geological and geophysical information, mostly to do with location of wells. Here at headquarters, we don't have a lot of that kind of information, but I know out in the field, they have Bureau of Land Management records. Every so often, they'll have to hold something for B9. It's probably the least used FOIA provision of all. Just to back up a little, it's just to make it clear for everyone, the National Archives is a federal agency just like any other federal agency. So the FOIA applies to us the way it does everyone else. The difference is that the records that come here are the 2 to 3% of the most important records of the documenting the function of government. So there is a weight towards release on these provisions that are discretionary, like personal privacy. That doesn't mean that we don't recognize that personal privacy is obviously in the records, but we are doing a balancing test. And considering the significance of the records that come to us, it is possible that we may release records that would not be released when they are in the custody of the agency. Also, time has passed, people die, that kind of thing. So how about B2 and B5? Whoop. I don't have a separate one for that. Okay, so we generally do not use B2 or B5, and here is why. And this comes up a lot at accessioning. So under the current case law, and of course every B provision has been litigated, and the courts tell us how we're supposed to apply it, only the most insignificant personnel-related records would fit into this category. The example I always give is, the list of individuals who are allowed to park in your parking garage, right? That's the type of information we're talking about. In our opinion, this type of record should not be among the permanently valuable 2 to 3% of federal records that come to the National Archives. So there really should be no reason that we would hold for B2. B5 deals with intra-agency communications. All deliberation should be complete prior to the transfer of records to NARA. All current business need should be over. And so records with a current business need should not be transferred to NARA. We have historically, generally, not protected for B5. And that can be a tough one for agencies because that is something that is used a lot in agencies for current business records. So this is part of the reason that we came up with the 15-year rule, because we feel that that's often around the time parameters that B5 is most relevant. But just so you understand, if you put B5 down as a reason to transfer, you're probably going to get some pushback from our accessioning folks. We often get questions about the Privacy Act. This is a little weird, a little tricky. The Privacy Act only applies to identified system of records while the records are in the custody of the originating agency. Once the records are transferred to NARA, if you read the Privacy Act, NARA is excluded from the Privacy Act, from the provisions of the Privacy Act. And those provisions are things like someone getting in touch with you and saying, the information in my file is incorrect and I need it to be corrected. That will not hold over once the records come to NARA. However, NARA can easily hold the privacy information within these records under the privacy provisions of the FOIA. So it's not that the records are going to be made available to the public, it's just that the specific provisions of the Privacy Act no longer apply once they come to NARA. Even records that are not in a Privacy Act system of records often contain privacy information, which of course we're going to protect. CUI is another question that comes up very often. So the only restrictions that NARA can apply are those 9 provisions of the FOIA. CUI markings are often used by agencies while the records are in their custody to control who within the agency has access to the information or to control dissemination between agencies. Once those records come to NARA, those markings really don't mean anything to us. So if the reason for the CUI marking is that the documents contain information that can also be covered by a FOIA provision, let us know which FOIA provision. But FOUO is really not going to mean anything to us. If there's no reason a record can be held under the FOIA, we're not going to be able to withhold the documents. So, Matt Edson's team came up with a webinar, which is on YouTube. So if you'd like a little more guidance about how to fill out the TR, how to make that determination, this is really great. I know one of my staff actually sat in on this webinar to answer any questions that might come up. And I think it was really well done, so I would urge you to look at that site. So what happens at NARA when sensitive records are transferred to our custody? Well, once we get the TR, it says there's personal privacy, our accessioning team looks at it, says, yeah, that makes sense. They're going to flag the records in our holdings management system. So our holdings management system is our most basic physical control system. It tells us where things are on the shelf, in the box, which shelf, where you're going to find it. But there is metadata fields, and one of the metadata fields is an access restriction metadata field. So from the day that the records are in our building, almost exactly to the day, that access field will be there. The purpose of this is so that the processing staff who will do the processing on these records eventually and the reference staff understand the access status of the documents the minute it comes in the door. The boxes are also physically stamped with a stamp that says, "Do not pull." We think that's about as clear as possible because we have technicians who, when people come into the research room to access the records, they go in the stacks, they pull them, and they bring them in. If the reference archivist didn't notice that there was an access restriction when the researcher came in, the pull staff will see that sticker and they won't pull the records. So it's kind of a dual control. Obviously, classified records are maintained in classified stacks, and all information security specifications are applied to those. As time passes, records become less sensitive. People die. All kinds of things happen. Records will all eventually be released, or there's no reason for them to be at the National Archives. So NARA will change the access status as appropriate. This is often prompted by a Freedom of Information Act request from a researcher. Just like every other federal agency, we are subject to the FOIA. My team gets about 1,200 FOIA requests a year, mostly for FBI case files, but for lots of different things as well. For unclassified records, NARA will not routinely consult with agencies when making determinations about records at transfer. We're going to make the determination ourselves, unless we feel that there's some information that could help us to make that determination. For classified records, we will be consulting with the agency. The National Archives does not have any declassification authority. So what we do is the National Declassification Center has a FOIA team. They read the records. They make the determination which agencies have equities, because it's not always the originating agency. They transfer the documents. Usually they scan them and send them electronically with like a CD back to the agencies that have the equities. The agencies make the determinations. They tell NARA how to apply those determinations, where to redact or whatever. They apply it and they communicate with the researcher. So all communication with the researcher is done through NARA, but the decision for classified records is taken care of by the agency itself. So how do researchers know what the access status is? If I'm in California and I'm thinking of coming to the National Archives to do research, it would be good to know whether I can actually access the records once I get here. So the National Archives catalog is where you're going to find that. You can see where it says access restrictions. I know this is small and I'm sorry, but it's towards the bottom. In this case, it says restricted fully. It gives the reason for the restriction. We like to let researchers know. In this case, it's classified. There's also personal privacy and law enforcement information. So we're going to capture that metadata on our holdings, and then the metadata access restriction field should give researchers the information they need. In addition, for all new accessions that are coming in, we are now posting the accessions that have been, the new records that have been coming in. We made sure that the access field is noted as well. So on the right, you can see the first three are unrestricted. Then we've got restricted fully, unrestricted. So what do the restriction labels mean? If it says restricted fully, then that means you can't have access at all unless you file a Freedom of Information Act request. This is generally for classified records or records that NARA is certain contain sensitive information. Restricted possibly means that when the records came in, they may have come in from the agency as unrestricted, but we saw something in our assessment that concerned us. In those situations, those records will be pulled out of the stacks and taken to the hold area, and then someone from my team will come down and do a very quick assessment based on the file folders, and they might look inside a couple files to make a determination. They're trained to know what to do. If they see a single sensitive document in a box, we will change the status of that to restricted fully, and people are going to have to file a Freedom of Information Act request. But this is helpful because fairly often we've been conservative upon accessioning, which is fine. But when my team looks at it, we realize that there's nothing sensitive. We will then change the access status in HMS, put a label on it that says it's been screened so we never have to look at it again. What we don't want is have a researcher come in one day and see the records, come in 2 weeks or 2 months later and have someone tell them they're sensitive. That's very bad. That would make me extremely angry if I was a researcher. So our goal is to be transparent, to know what's sensitive the day it comes in the door, to be consistent, and to try to keep that level of communication open with the researchers. Restricted partly is going to mean that these records have been reviewed. They've probably been redacted or withheld in full certain pages, but you can see them. So if it is restricted partly, it's just a way of letting researchers know there's not everything is going to be served to you, but you can see the box. And if anything is withheld, you will see a withdrawal form. If it's redacted, it will be obvious. On the redacted pages, you will see the reason for the redaction on the side. And unrestricted is pretty straightforward. So that's it for the big overview. I don't know if we want to do questions later on or questions now. Anyone?
Hi, Catherine Findlay with DOC OIG. I was just curious, you had mentioned something like 1,200 FOIA requests per year, and is that from, cradle to grave in terms of receipt and then close out?
I wish. We have a backlog.
I'm sorry, I was just
Okay.
curious, because that's a huge number. Thank you.
So of the ones that come in, about 25 to 30% are for classified records, and we're sending those up to our National Declassification Center. About 25% are people who, or even more, are filing Freedom of Information Act requests for records that are clearly open. You know, people will say a petition from the 1800s and they're filing a FOIA. And that's just because they don't understand how the National Archives works and that it's our mission to make these records available and you don't have to file the FOIA. So those are real easy. We send those to our reference staff. There's about 1,200 left that we actually have to do review on. And so this last quarter, we actually reviewed as much and closed as what came in. It's the first time in about 5 or 10 years that has happened. We have received thousands of cubic feet of FBI files in the last 5 to 10 years. My staff has more than tripled in size in it, and we're still growing. So we're working on it. But we do have a backlog. Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Anyone have questions here? No. Okay, one of the things I did not do is introduce myself, and I apologize for that. My name is Gordon Everett, and I'm the Director for Customer Relationship Management for the Federal Records Center program. And we have, I have 4 of my team here today. If you have issues for the account managers, I have with me today David Williams, Arthur Hawkins, Karen Scott, and Andrea Shear, who are with us today. So if you have any account issues or issues with our 18 federal record centers, you can see one of those folks or myself, and we'll try and address that for you. Okay, do we have Andrea ready?
I'm here.
The other thing I did want to say before we bring Andrea on, this afternoon from 1 to 3, we have the meet and greet with Appraisal Team 3. So if your agency is a part of Appraisal Team 3, we will meet this afternoon in the Jefferson Room, back on the mezzanine level. Okay. Do we have Andrea? Andrea, are you there?
I'm here. Can anybody hear me? Hello?
Ooh, go ahead and start, Andrea.
Okay, you can hear me? All right. Bring up my first slide. I'm sorry, I got delay with the YouTube, so I cannot see the slides. I'm going to have to go off of my own. So I'm here today to present on GRS Transmittal 26, which we hope will come out in September, early September. It's in the pipeline right now, going through approvals, and should be out within a few more weeks, we think. There's not a lot of new content with this transmittal. We do have our first completely new schedule, which is GRS 4.4, covers library records. Those records have never been covered by the GRS before. The rest of the changes in Transmittal 26 are to schedules we've already released, and so they're basically newer, updated items. So I'll go over kind of what those changes are so you can kind of be prepared for them when they come out. So let's see. If you can go to slide that starts with something completely new. That's GRS 4.4. This is, as I said, first schedule from this project that is completely new. It covers 3 types of records: library administrative records. These are more about the management of an agency library, such as policies, planning, and outreach. And we have operational records, which is the day-to-day library operations, such as reference inquiries, visitor logs, digitization requests. And then the last one is interlibrary loan records. So it's a pretty short schedule, but we are proud of it because it is something completely new. Next slide, please. The changes to GRS 1.1. There are some things here that you should be aware of. I've highlighted at the bottom the fact that agencies that store records at the Federal Records Centers under GRS 1.1 item 10, which is the main item on that schedule for procurement records and acquisition records and all those things. You should carefully review your holdings to determine if any of them are now covered by new item 12, which is for unsolicited bids that are not accepted. These were not previously covered by 1.1. One of the other changes is that we pulled out federal procurement data system records from item 10 and made it its own standalone item because it has a slightly different retention. We've also added items for contract appeals, case files, and vendor and bidder information. So those are some of the changes you'll see coming in GRS 1.1. Next slide, please. 2.8, very, very small change that the Office of Government Ethics pointed out to us in the disposition instructions for item 10. It's just a clarification. The new instruction clarifies that agencies should retain the records for 6 years after an ethics termination. And you can see advice and counseling to an individual employee. That's no longer in effect. It's rather 6 years from when the agency issued the advice. So there was some slightly different language there that was confusing and actually resulted in different retention, and so we tried to clear that up. And if you have further questions, particularly about this one, please just contact the GRS team so I can forward you to the appraiser for this schedule because she can answer them much better than I can. And our email address, if you don't know it, will be at the end of this presentation. Here's 4.2. We've added some content. We've also made some changes. Item 20, we converted an exclusion to a note. That's pretty minor change just to kind of clarify disposition of the original records related to any FOIA Privacy Act or mandatory declassification review request. We also clarified coverage for some other items to eliminate confusion that has been reported to us by agencies. And we've added items to the schedule that relate to privacy requirements for electronic systems. So things like SORNs, PIAs, PTAs, and IPAs, and computer matching program notices and agreements. So those are new coverage in the GRS, and so there's new items for that to be aware of. And this is also a good indicator of if you are to find something in the GRS that seems problematic, confusing, whatever, and you contact us, it can result in changes. So we do try to be responsive to agencies about that. And then finally, GRS 6.1, we've incorporated the change that was implemented to the cutoff instruction in AC Memo 18/2016. So it's not really new per se because it had already been issued. It was a pen and ink change that we wanted to get out sooner rather than later, so agencies make use of that. And there's an FAQ related to that, so we recommend if you have questions to check that. We've also added some other new FAQs, largely related to legacy email, and so you will find those in the new transmittal as well. Just some reminders about implementation. When new GRS come out, there are some things agencies need to do. If you don't have a previously approved authority for any of these records, and this relates to only the new content, you must either use the GRS or submit a schedule requesting a deviation. If you don't create or maintain the records covered by the GRS, you don't have to do anything. And then you have 6 months to distribute the new GRS to your staff. If you do need to request a deviation, you may request one. You may request to use existing approved authorities instead of the GRS. If you wish to do that, you need to submit a notification. All of this is in the CFR and the reference that's cited on the previous slide. But you need to get that to us within 120 days of issuance of the new transmittal. It should be sent to the GRS team at our email account. It's GRS_team@nara.gov. The underscore kind of disappears there, but there is an underscore there. There is a spreadsheet available on our website that you can use to submit the notification. It helps us out. No need to submit any deviations for what we return the old GRS. Really, you only need to submit a deviation for new content. So even if it's a newer GRS that's just part of the overall transmittal, if it's not new content, you can't submit a notification. So just a reminder about that. Oh, next slide. I think hopefully we may be back, maybe going faster than my slides, and I apologize for that. So we should get the slide when a notification is required. So anytime an agency plans to use its own authority for records covered by a newly issued GRS, this includes big bucket schedules and incorporate records covered by the GRS. So that those do require notification. We pretty much always, say, no problem, thanks, and you don't have to do anything other than notify us. Also, if an agency wishes to continue to use its own authority instead of the GRS, even if the retention is the same as, fits within what the GRS allows. Because remember, the GRS has a lot of flexible disposition instructions, so it can allow longer retentions than the minimum set in the GRS. Even if an agency chooses to use its own authority and it still fits within the parameters of the GRS, it's still a deviation because you're using your own authority. So basically, a deviation is defined as using an agency authority instead of the GRS. And in those cases, we do still require notification. Next slide, please. Let's see. So notifications are not required if an agency chooses to use the GRS, but sets a specific retention within the retention parameters. So if GRS item says you can retain records longer than 3 years, and the agency wants to retain them for 5 years. You can do that without a notification as long as you still cite the GRS. Also, deviations from old GRS items that have not yet been superseded. If you have those, you don't need to do anything. If you have an agency authority and it relates to something that hasn't yet been updated, there's no need to take any action. Next slide. So just to give you an update on future transmittals, because we are coming to the end of the update project, the deadline from the presidential directive December 2017, and that's coming up on us fairly soon. And so we have 21 schedules that are somewhere in the process of from development to nearly approved. We expect to issue 3 transmittals in 2017. They will each be at least 4 months apart to give you that 120 days for notifications. We expect our next transmittal to be out in February or March. Then it'll be followed by another one in June or July. And then our last one would be November if needed. Could be December, but we're hoping for it to be done a little bit early. So just be prepared for a lot of transmittal activity in the coming year. Since we are going to have 3 of these out, where we decided to try to split things up so we didn't dump. I think we were looking at something like 16 schedules or something that might have gone out in the next transmittal. We decided to go ahead and do a February or March transmittal to put out the ones that are a little bit closer to being done, to split those out so that we weren't dumping a ton of new schedules on agencies all at once, so you'll have it kind of spaced out. So if you have any questions, please contact the GRS team. As again, our email is grs_team@nara.gov. You can also check out our website, specific to GRS, has FAQs and other recent news, has monthly status updates on the project, so you can always look there as well. And one last thing before I go or open for questions, I just want to put a plug in. This isn't actually GRS related, but the Office of the Chief Records Officer is going to be sending out a survey in September or October related to ERA. It's going out to all ERA users to gather input on user experience and suggestions for enhancements on the business objects, which are the record schedule, the transfer request, as well as some of the additional functionality like search and the print features and things like that. And so you can expect to see that the notice about that survey going out here in the next few months. And as I said, it's going to all ERA users. So if somebody has an account with ERA, the plan is that they should be getting that survey. So any questions?
Okay. Any questions online or in the room for Andrea? Okay. We don't seem to have any. No questions at all. Thank you, Andrea. Oh, hold on, Andrea, we do have one. Hold on.
Hi, it's Catherine Findlay with DOCOIG again. I had just done a search with the records management /GRS address and got a file not found. For the AC 18.2016, they've got records -MGMT. Than the slash. So I'm not quite sure if there should be a dash in between the records management on the website address. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, we've had a number of issues with our website lately that we've been trying to deal with files not pulling up, and it has various reasons. So yeah, I will pass on the memo is not opening.
address that we're showing, is that the correct address?
The website that I've got on the page for the GRF should be correct, I believe, because I just cut and paste it. Unless somebody's changed the website link on me in the meantime.
All right. We'll have to verify it then. Why don't we verify that and make sure we have it right so we can make sure folks are being able to reach you. Okay. Any other questions for Andrea? Seeing none, we'll move over to David Miller, who is the Director of Records Management Services for the Federal Record Center program. And he'll bring you an update, talk about records management consulting and the other services that he offers. David?
Hey, there I am. Hey, good morning, everyone. I want to take a few minutes to talk about some special services at the FRC program. No doubt you're well familiar with record storage and retrieval and disposition. I'm going to talk a little bit about records management consulting services as well as records digitization services, services that we offer in a nutshell, and then talk about how you might reach us if you need more information or if you've got some projects in mind that we might be able to help you with. So the range of services that we offer through our consulting program, you see on screen, we'll go through these in a little bit of detail. We offer services to support your program. We aren't really in a position to do full-time details for you. We get questions quite a bit on that where, can you send someone over for 6 months to fill in? We can't quite do that. But what we do is work on a project or task basis in all these areas here. So let me go through these in some more detail, and we can leave time for questions at the end. The first one at the top left is the Records Management Program Assessment. That's a very common service that we provide to agencies who don't quite know where to begin. Maybe on an enterprise level or within a single organizational unit or geographic area, you might want someone to come in and do a review of record-keeping practices, policies, schedules, what have you, in those organizations to give you a sense of what the holes might be in your program, what the next steps might be to address some of those, and how to prioritize your work over the next period of time. So those program assessments often are built around the Federal Records and Information Management Maturity Model, about which you've heard quite a bit at BRIDG meetings over the last year or two. In many cases, we do apply that model and try to give a kind of a standard set of recommendations and next steps based on that format. Often that program assessment leads to a lot of follow-on work on your part or on the part of ourselves to help address some of those issues that we've uncovered. Quite a common service that we do provide for you are records inventories. We can help you identify legacy records within programs that maybe you haven't touched in a while. We can help identify records that maybe are unscheduled, need to be handled in some way. But we can bring a team of our analysts in to help oversee those kinds of records inventories, help conceive of them, give you some structure to be able to have reportable results from your records inventories. And typically following on a records inventory, the next couple of boxes, that's often the natural next step is once we've done the inventory, what do we do with this stuff? Can we make determinations about can these records be disposed of? Can the records be transferred? Are these records unscheduled that we need to take some action on? That's the common next step is that records disposition review, where our team will give you recommendations about what to do with those records we've identified. Like I said, we're typically going to identify or uncover unscheduled records through the course of our records inventories. And if that comes up, we are available to draft record schedules, either new schedules, revised schedules for those programs and records that we've uncovered. We can also do record scheduling projects on a more enterprise basis where we can kind of create comprehensive big bucket schedules for you if that's what you're interested in for managing your program. We also provide consultation and advice in the realm of digital records, electronic record keeping, and more contemporary business processes. We're not just about the analog records. So during the course of our work with you, typically we'll get involved in teasing out some electronic record keeping requirements that might be unique to your business, things that kind of add on to the Federal Records Act requirements and the standard records management requirements that we have across the government. We can help you identify stakeholders and requirements who can speak to some unique issues that you might be encountering that need to be incorporated in whatever technologies you use to manage your records. We don't necessarily have the technologies to sell you or to implement for you, but we can help you get from here to there, working with your internal stakeholders, with acquisitions, with legal, with IT, and what have you. Often, many of you are involved in continuity of operations planning and the vital records component of that. We can provide assistance with identifying your emergency operating records and the records you need to conduct business in the hours and days and weeks after an event or an emergency. So if you need help bootstrapping your program, someone to talk to about where to start with the Vital Records program, we're available to help in that realm as well. The office moves and closure planning, that's a real hot one because that's a kind of a slow motion disaster for a lot of us when we lose leases or we have to constrict office space or move from one place to another. That's a time of great risk to records. Often when we're pressed for time and kind of in a crazy headspace there when we're moving our offices around, we can make rash decisions about our records and what to do with them. So if you bring us in, we can help you more systematically look at what your records are, what needs to happen to them as you move from one place to the other or shut down an operation. We can help you get things moved off site or disposed of properly or handled in whatever way is appropriate for those records. And the catch-all service is their policies and procedures development. We can help you beef up your records management manuals. We can help you update some of your procedures about how to manage information and oversee the management of the information within your organization. So we have senior records analysts who can help with your organization, looking at your business processes and what needs to happen to make sure your information and records are secured and handled appropriately. So let me move from consulting into our other special service, the records digitization or scanning services. We offer this service at a handful of FRCs around the country. We call them document conversion units or pods, depending on how hip and cool you want to be with the lingo. That's our digitization services. So we offer that around the country at a number of sites from end to end, from document preparation at the earliest stages of a digitization project through the understanding of what metadata are essential to maintain access and preservation of those records, the quality control throughout that process, and then delivering images that are of a sufficient quality to meet your business needs, and in the case of permanently valuable records, to make sure these records are of sufficient quality that the National Archives can accept them and they meet our transfer requirements. So we can handle a variety of analog material, certainly paper, oversized material, maps and cartography. We can handle that at some of our sites. We can deal with fragile bound and kind of material that requires special handling, books and archival material like that. We can handle photography, black and white, grayscale, color. And we handle microforms, film, fiche, aperture cards. If you've got a format and you're interested in getting that digitized and getting those records into electronic form, please reach out to us and we can talk about a possible project to get that done. So along with our services, we do customized indexing where we can work with you about what your requirements are and understand what metadata might be living within those records that we can extract through the process or capture in some other way and preserve so that later users can find those records more easily. I mentioned earlier for records of permanent value, we want to make sure that we're producing images that are of sufficient quality that the National Archives will be able to accept them in the future. Of course, we're very aware of that as we're looking at projects and records to digitize to make sure what the life cycle of those records are. Now, certainly not everything we digitize is of permanent value, but typically it's of fairly long-term value to make it financially worthwhile. So we need to make sure the output formats are sufficient for those business uses and preservation uses. And of course, we've got quality assurance along the way through the end-to-end process, through our source to on-screen image review and the scanning process through just managing the overall project, whether it's 10 boxes or 1,000 boxes, is making sure that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, we're producing the images that you expect to see, and that the output is sufficient to be of use to you and to the National Archives in the future. So whether it's scanning services or consulting services, it's pretty much the same workflow in terms of how we get started. Really, the impetus comes from you. You understand what your needs are better than we do typically. You have tasks in mind, you've got goals in mind, you've got deliverables, you've got schedules that you want to meet. Come to us with those expectations. Set the scope, start the conversation with us about what we might be able to do for you and when we might be able to do it for you. So once we set the scope and the expectations, then we can work on our end to develop a cost estimate of what kind of labor it might require on our end, what kind of scanning process might be appropriate for digitization. And we'll produce a cost estimate of the labor and the per image cost for a given project, based on the discussions that we've had about requirements and scope. We're easily reached through the interagency agreements. Certainly if you're an existing FRC customer, it's fairly a simple matter to reach us and get us started on a records management consulting project or a digitization project. There's no extra acquisition process alongside that. And of course, whatever work we do, we'll bill monthly through ARCUS. So you'll see it on your bill, it'll be visible to you, you'll understand what the charges are relating to, and you'll have periodic narrative reports that go alongside that to show progress on what's going on with a given task or project. Various avenues to find out more. You can certainly contact me directly. My email and phone number are there at the bottom. You can also, in any case, reach out to your FRC account manager. Several are here in the room, but reach out through that site to find your account manager if you're not familiar with him or her. They can guide you through our services, not just the special services, but other FRC work that we do. Or you can email the programs directly. You can email our consulting program at rmconsulting@nar.gov, or that second email there is FRC_scanning@nar.gov if you want more information about how to get started with the scanning project and starting to have that conversation with our technical staff about your requirements and needs. And that's what I had on special services at the FRC. Do we have any questions either online or here in the room? We've got one here in the room.
Good morning, Steve Welch from the Department of Interior. Just have a question regarding the consulting services. So if, say I had a records management manual that needed to be reviewed, could I just reach out to you guys directly, or would I have to go through that process of determining cost, interagency agreement, that type of thing?
Yeah, you just reach out to us directly, and we would understand what you wanted us to do with the manual, whatever updates you wanted. We'd sort of understand the scope. We don't want to just go into it blindly, but we
Okay.
negotiate the scope, and then pretty easily from there, if you've got an agreement with the FRC program already with what you're doing, we can either add funding to that agreement or use existing funding if it's already in place.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any other questions here in the room or online? Okay, the room is silent. Okay, thank you. Yes.
Correct. I did look up the email address for the previous presentation,
Yeah.
and there is a hyphen in that email address.
That's what I was going to look for. You're exactly right. And there. So right in between records and management should be a hyphen. So we'll get that. Okay. Okay, here we go. Matt Atson will bring us an update on the 2017 annual move. Matt?
Good morning. Ernst told me we're kind of working ahead of schedule, so that's good news, maybe before the heat wave arrives, if it hasn't already. I'm Matt Itzen, supervisor for the Permanent Records Capture team. I've been serving as the acting national coordinator for the annual move since Lynn Stewart's departure last fall. And before I get started, I wanted to express my gratitude for all of you who have been working with the annual move each year to get the records accessioned into NARA. It is our primary way of getting permanent records, so I appreciate you guys working in the past and upcoming for the 2017 annual move. So what is the annual move? NARA's process for legally transferring permanent records from the Federal Records Center to NARA archival units across the nation. The annual move is uniquely cross-functional. It's an activity that supports NARA's core mission of preserving permanently valuable records of the federal government. And the annual move is overseen by this cross-functional group, Annual Move Coordinating Group. To facilitate the accessioning of permanent records, NARA provides agencies with pre-populated transfer requests in ERA, Electronic Records Archives, for all permanent records stored in federal record centers. NARA creates these transfer requests, we refer to them as TRs, on an annual basis, since the overwhelming majority of such records become eligible in January of the disposition year, that is, the year in which the records are eligible to be accessioned by the National Archives. So for this annual move, 2017 records eligible by January. Work relating to each annual move, we also call P-move. So you might see a P and then the year P 2017 would refer to the annual move for the year 2017. The cycle runs for more than 2 years prior. So while we're introducing the 2017 annual move, we've already gotten started on it 2 years, in October of 2015. The activities relating to one move cycle will overlap with both the previous and subsequent move cycles. For instance, work on the January 2017 move year began in October of 2015 and could run through 2018 and 2019. So there is nothing annual about the annual move. That's one of the facts that I discovered. We definitely have at least 3 overlapping moves at any given time. And there is also something to consider that you may not know. There isn't an automated process between ARCIS and ERA. So what we have to do is export the data from ARCIS for those records and transform the data. It's at a resource-intensive process that takes place during the summer months for the data for the upcoming move. Though no automatic link to export, and in order to get the TRs loaded by October the 1st, we have to transform the data. Once they are loaded into ERA, agencies have 3 months to propose them to the custodial units, meaning that agencies would review their TRs and act on them. If no action is taken, the TR is deleted within 15 months as an effort to keep our data clean. Who does it apply to for users of the Federal Records Center, and why is it important? I hope to continue to talk to you about that through this presentation. So how did we do last year? For the 2016 annual move, the agencies would have proposed. So the technical term in ERA is proposed from your end, from the agency end, completed approval of eligible transfers loaded by December the 1st, 2015. So of the 162 agencies identified, 74 participated by approving transfers. That's 45%. This is better than our typical 40%. And you see the numbers there, 177,000 cubic feet of eligible records were loaded, and 132,000 were approved. This is what happened in the prior year. And you may ask, what happens to the records that don't get approved or proposed by agencies, the TRs that we loaded that no action was taken on by the agencies? And have no fear, we may delete the TR. We're not doing anything with the records. They remain in the record center on the shelves, and they are still within the accountability, within the documentation of the Federal Record Center program. And that next slide describes what has been happening over the last couple of years. We've have a backlog in the annual move. So as you saw in the prior slide, we only get about 40 to 45% of what's loaded approved. So what's eligible, less than half actually makes it to the accessioning phase. So we have about 292,000 cubic feet of records that are in backlog. And these are the years in which the records were eligible. So the records should have came and how many didn't come in those years. And you can see in recent years, we've had a steady increase in records that should have come that didn't. And mostly about 90% since 2005, but a good 10% of the younger records. And if you were to ask me where would be an area where an agency could focus on working on their annual move backlog, I would say the oldest records, so don't get confused, these are the annual move cycles, and how much were eligible at that particular time. But I would imagine that the oldest records are going to be on the lower end of this chart, pre-1990, 1999, and below might be an area where you could focus. So that's why it's important. So why is it important to approve and review these TRs as we do in this cycle? And because, for NARA, that's our mission to preserve permanent records of the federal government, but also at a rate of $3.36 per year per box. It's very costly. You can do the math, and so there could be cost implications, and so that's another reason, motivation why it would be important. Where are most of the backlog? 40% are at Suitland, Maryland, 11% Lenexa, Kansas, another 10% in Fort Worth, Texas. So those are our big record centers where most of our annual move backlog remains. So coming up on our actions for 2017, the good news we can work towards. The annual move coordinating group generates an updated ARCIS list of eligible transfers on or about July the 15th, and so we sent those out this year. Transfers may not be added to, but they may be removed from this list until September the 1st. The list is then provided to ARCIS system engineers for data transformation and to agencies for internal review. The final list of eligible transfers include records that are stored in an FRC, consist of permanent records, have a disposition date in the current year cycle, and included in each annual year is what we have termed the 5-year sweep. So records, and this helps with getting the backlog reviewed again, they come back in a 5-year increment. So records that have a disposition date that is 5, 10, 15, or 20 years overdue. For example, in the 2017 cycle, it will also include records that were eligible in 2017, 2012, 2007, 2002, and 1997. So those 5 years are the ones that are also included in the backlog in 2017. Also, records that do not have an internal Z freeze code, which is an ARCIS code that if disposition related, and received by Federal Record Centers no later than June the 1st. The annual move coordinating group distributes the spreadsheets of eligible records to agencies, and agencies are encouraged to respond to NARA about specific transfers, changes that they note or need to be removed and eligible before TRs are created in ERA. Updates from agencies regarding the transfers must be received by September the 1st in order for the corrected information to be loaded into ERA. After September the 1st, agencies are responsible or could manually correct the data themselves and informing the appropriate Federal Record Centers as needed. On October the 1st, NARA will create TRs and ERA for the eligible records for that move cycle. For instance, TRs for 2017 will be loaded on October the 1st, 2016. So that's our date upcoming. You can propose your TRs and ERA from October to December the 1st. Final determination on whether to approve any records or transfers will be made by NARA archival units after the submission of the TR by the agency. Including the TRs or an agency's reviews does not imply that they will be approved by the archival unit. So we make every effort ahead of time to review the documentation to ensure they're eligible for transfers. But there is reasonable effort made by NARA to ensure that ineligible records are not accessioned. So it may be possible, even to this stage, that the transfers could be disapproved. So if agencies submit TRs for approval by NARA before December the 1st, NARA will move those records in the January through March quarter. Agencies may propose TRs for later transfer after December the 1st. Those would be moved in the summer quarter, July through September. So your goal, should be December the 1st. If you don't make December the 1st, there's a subsequent later move in the summer. Suggested actions, and so I mentioned this, candidate lists were sent in July to your agency records officer. So you have a kind of a read ahead of what's going to be loaded into ERA on October the 1st. So what should you do now until October the 1st? Preparing, so you have this October to December time frame to propose your TRs to NARA. Ensure that your login is active and you have the correct roles and access to necessary record groups. We find this to often be the case. Your passwords expire, or you have some record groups or some records that have come up from these older moves that you wouldn't necessarily have dealt with recently. So you may not have access to the particular record group. You need to work with the help desk to get your login active and your access and your roles established. Obtain any necessary internal concurrences. This goes, in your own agency, what concurrences you need to have records transferred to National Archives. Distribute any breakout lists to records custodians. So I know that this could be the case with field operating units that you need to, or program offices. You can slice the data that we've sent you a number of different ways to distribute it and hear back. Any issues that you come across, please email us, annual.move@nara.gov. Of course, you should review any related transfer documentation, such as SF-135's ARCIS data, that you may need to consult with or have your access to for completing and submitting the TR. So there are some helpful resources available online. Mostly it's going to be like at that point of time when you're ready to find your TRs and you're ready to approve them. So look for the archives.gov ERA training page. You will find the information you need. I also have a plug for the ERA user manual, which is downloadable from the ERA website. Very helpful screenshots, step-by-step, once you get into ERA to approve your transfers. And please help to increase our 45% this year. Get even higher numbers. Any questions? Yes.
Hi. Yes, Tom Lee from the Air Force. I had a strange situation last week, in which case my declassification office was trying to accession some records to NARA. However, with the standard form 258, I was going like, well, why are we using the 258 instead of trying to do this in ERA? Nevertheless, my team completed the standard form 258. However, they were informed by the NARA team that It cannot be digitally signed and just email, and it cannot be faxed. Instead, it had to have the original wet signature mailed through the U.S. Postal Service, which I did, and so was hopefully received by my declassification team and sent forward to the NARA Permanent Records team. So I'm just curious why, one, we're not allowed to use ERA instead of the standard form 258, and secondly, why won't NARA accept digital signatures on the 258? Thank you.
Sure, sure. So there's a number of exceptions for using ERA. I think we have them listed in the CFR through NARA notices. So I assume this situation was one of those exceptions. Otherwise, we must use ERA for direct offers and for annual move. And so, you know, the one benefit, I mean, like, we certainly will be looking to make some improvements in ERA and the near term, as Andrea mentioned, survey forthcoming, you know, I think that the benefits of using ERA as opposed to the 258 forms, that, you know, you'd have greater visibility for your agency on what's going on if you had you know, your program units and offices still using paper-based form. You know, there's this lack of centralization, so you're not quite sure the activity you know, going on. So ERA does provide some benefits. There are some exceptions, and one that I can think of related to classified. If the 258 itself is classified, then that would require something that you described, you know, at a kind of a more formalized process for getting the records. And as far as digital signatures, don't have a good answer for that. We do allow in our 135s, I think, faxed email digital signature. I have some FRC personnel that could correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah. So I have to maybe review your specific case and see if I can find out more details about it. But there are some exceptions for using ERA, but for the most part, we should use ERA. It's our system for transferring records. Any other questions? All right, Gordon. Joy the heat wave.
Okay, are there any questions on any of the subject matter that we went through today? If not, we've come to the end of the program for today. I just want to remind the folks from Appraisal Team 3 that they will meet at 1 o'clock in the Jefferson Room, and that would be all of the agencies who have RSVP'd for the Appraisal Team 3 meetings. Okay, thanks very much for coming out, and try and stay cool, folks. Thank you.